Imagine a road that bends where the earth itself seems hungry, swallowing headlights and leaving silence in its wake. Welcome, traveler. Tonight we follow stories of asphalt and shadow, where tires hum and families vanish. Not myths, not whispers, but the places locals still refuse to drive after dusk. Listen closely. The curve remembers every name it has taken. Now start with first story. The forest lay still that morning, its trees suspended in a hush too deep to be natural. Mist gathered low against the earth, sliding across the ground like something alive. The road, cracked, narrow, and unlit, curved hard against the hillside, a bend locals learned never to trust. They called it the Hollow Mouth, as if the earth had split open and waited, patient, for those who drifted too near. The caravan set out before the sun had lifted, its windows glowing pale within the fog. 6 souls inside, father at the wheel, mother beside him, 4 children curled in the back. Their laughter had carried through the thin walls of canvas and metal, a bright contrast to the forest's gloom. They were travelers, not strangers to the road, used to mornings of packed bags and lukewarm coffee. But the locals remembered their headlights cutting into that bend, how the beams split against the mist, and then nothing. By noon, searchers walked the curve, their boots sinking into the wet shoulder. They found no wreckage, no broken glass glittering in the mud. Only tire tracks, thick, heavy, and fresh, spiraling like a coiled snake into the hillside, where no road had ever been. The marks ended abruptly at the tree line, as if the caravan had driven straight into the woods without bending a branch. Hours later, the mother was found. Barefoot, dazed, her nightdress clinging to her like seaweed, she stood at the roadside, whispering. Witnesses swore she pressed her lips to the bark of trees, murmuring each child's name as if they lived inside the wood. Her feet were shredded raw, blood seeping into soil already dark with dew. She did not respond when called, did not turn when touched. Her voice moved endlessly from one name to another, a lullaby broken into fragments. When taken to the hospital, she spoke little. What words she offered came in fragments, scattered like feathers after a storm. We followed the road and it folded inside itself. The lights bent. The doors opened. They ran toward the sound. Doctors marked her state as shock, her memory unreliable. But those who sat by her bedside swore her eyes fixed always toward the far wall, following something unseen as if it moved just beyond their reach. The children were never found. Days turned to weeks, and rumors stitched themselves into the silence. Truckers claimed to hear laughter when their brakes hissed at the curve, faint but distinct, the high, bright sound of children playing hide-and-seek. One swore his rearview mirror filled with fog, and for a heartbeat he glimpsed tiny hands pressed against the glass, before the mist cleared and the road lay empty again. Another said he heard a nursery rhyme rising from his CB radio, static bending it into something warped and broken. The caravan itself left no trace. No insurance records, no stolen vehicle report, no discovery downstream in the gullies or ravines. It was as though the machine had been swallowed whole, metal and flesh alike. Only the mother remained, moving later to a cabin far from the road. Travelers claimed they sometimes saw her walking barefoot at dusk, trailing fingers along the trunks, still whispering those names into the trees. There are those who believe the road itself took them. That the curve marks not an accident site but a seam, a fold between one place and another. Folklorists tell older tales of that stretch of highway, when it was nothing but a wagon path. Families spoke of wagons vanishing into mist, their lanterns snuffed without sound, leaving oxen and drivers staring into emptiness. The earth, they said, remembered hunger, and the curve was its mouth. Others whisper of something deeper, that children are lured by a voice only they can hear. A sound rising in the mist, soft and sweet, a call like a parent's lullaby. They chase it, opening doors, slipping away before anyone notices. By the time the others turn their heads, only silence remains. Some truckers refuse to drive that road altogether, detouring miles out of their way rather than face the bend. Years later, one searcher returned, a man who had walked the roadside that first morning. He confessed to carrying a secret all his life, that while combing the ditch, he had heard footsteps pacing him inside the fog. Light, quick, running, When he stopped, the steps stopped. When he moved, they began again. He never turned to look, never dared. But when he left the ditch, he found a small shoe in his pocket. A child's, white with a faded cartoon rabbit. He never spoke of it until age left him trembling, and even then he wept as he held it, saying it still smelled faintly of smoke. The shoe was never matched to any record, but those who held it swore it grew damp in their hands, as though it had just been lifted from rain. The mother has long since passed, buried far from the curve, but her grave is marked not with her name, but with 6 initials carved into stone. Locals leave toys there sometimes, marbles, dolls, tiny cars, and every so often one goes missing, as if taken back, and the road endures. Asphalt repaved, guardrails replaced, white paint freshened each season. Yet still the fog thickens at that bend, drawn as if the earth exhales from a hidden wound. Still, truckers lower their radios, gripping the wheel tighter, listening for sounds they pray won't come. Still, travelers mark the sudden silence of birds when their headlights angle toward the curve. One detail repeats, passed from driver to driver like a whispered dare. If you roll your window down at the bend and cut your headlights, the silence will deepen, stretching until even your breath feels loud. Then, from somewhere close but impossible to place, you may hear it, a child's voice, light and distant, calling for mama, and if you answer, if you speak, the laughter will draw nearer, until you feel it all around you, invisible and countless. But when you turn your headlights back on, the road will be empty, and yet your rearview mirror will never quite be. The mother's whispers still cling to the curve, woven into bark and fog, waiting for ears that dare to listen. And though the family never returned, the road holds their echo like breath held in the lungs of earth. In the distance, another story waits to be told. A bus, its headlights steady, its windows filled with unseen faces, turning into the same bend. Now start with second story. The bend was quiet at sundown, when shadows stretched long and the trees began to murmur with wind. That was when the yellow bus appeared, unmistakable in its bulk, familiar in its shape, a vessel built for laughter and routine. It was spotted by 3 witnesses, a trucker passing westbound, a woman walking her dog near the tree line, and a farmer who swore he saw its headlights split the fog. Each described the same sight, a school bus turning calmly into the curve, headlights steady, tail lights glowing red against the mist. Yet the following morning, searchers discovered the vehicle idling by the roadside, its windows fogged, its interior strangely humid, as though filled moments before by living breath. The driver sat rigid in his seat, his hands fixed on the wheel, knuckles pale, eyes open wide. No wound marked him, no sign of struggle. His body was alive but empty. Doctors would later say he was catatonic, unresponsive to touch, locked in silence as though he still guided the wheel of a bus that was no longer there. Inside, the seats told their own story. Their vinyl was warm, faintly indented, as if bodies had only just risen from them. A layer of condensation smeared the glass, etched with faint shapes that looked like palms pressed against windows. Some swore they saw streaks where fingertips had dragged slowly downward, as though reluctant to leave. The smell inside was not unpleasant but uncanny, the faint sweetness of crayons, apple juice, and chalk dust, hanging heavy in the air like a memory too vivid to be natural. There were no passengers. Parents arrived, frantic, when word spread that a school bus had been found abandoned. But every child in the district was accounted for, tucked into their beds or seated safely in class. The bus was not on any registered route, its license plate traced to a vehicle decommissioned years earlier, stripped of parts and sold for scrap. According to official records, the bus should not exist. Still, it sat there, engine humming low, headlights steady until the fuel drained away. The driver remained silent. Not once did he blink during the first 3 days of his confinement. Nurses swore his eyes followed something unseen, his pupils darting as though tracking movement in the empty air. One night, as his body shivered under fever, he whispered a phrase so soft, the words trembled out like breath against glass. They were still singing. When pressed, he never spoke again. The bus was towed into storage, kept in a municipal lot under lock and key. Yet stories spread quickly. whispered through diners, truck stops, and dim bars along the highway. Some said the bus still returned to the curve on certain nights, headlights cutting fog, windows glowing faintly from within. Truckers claimed it lingered at crossroads, pausing as though to let unseen passengers disembark. A few admitted to honking or waving in jest, and regretted it. One man described a dream that followed him after his roadside wave. He said he boarded the bus in his sleep, its aisles lined with children who did not speak. Their heads turned in unison, their eyes black as night, their breath fogging the air around him. He woke drenched in sweat, the sound of the bus's brakes hissing in his ears. A month later, he vanished from his route, his truck found idling at the same curve. Another driver confessed that after seeing the bus, he would pass his own reflection in mirrors and glass, except the reflection always wore a school uniform, its face obscured by breath on the pane. He smashed every mirror in his home, yet still claimed to see fog bloom on the surfaces of water, as if a child pressed its lips against the skin of the world itself. Folklorists tied the story to a tragedy long buried. In the early 1960s, a school bus carrying dozens of children skidded from the highway curve and plunged into the river below. The bus was recovered days later, waterlogged, its windows fogged by the moisture of trapped lungs. Every passenger inside had drowned, their palms leaving faint prints across the glass. Locals swore that on fog-heavy nights, the curve exhaled their memory back into the world, the bus itself reborn as an echo of what was lost. Skeptics dismissed this as superstition. But those who entered the towed vehicle found it difficult to laugh, for the bus did not sit still. Mechanics reported the odometer ticking upward overnight, as though miles were added while it stood parked. Fuel drained without leaks. The radio flickered on in the absence of keys, playing children's voices warped through static, not songs, but the broken syllables of playground chants. One officer swore he heard his own daughter's name called through the hiss. No one kept watch for long. Eventually, the bus was declared hazardous and dismantled. Its pieces were scattered, the frame melted, the wheels stripped, the vinyl gutted. Yet even in separation, the parts carried whispers. A junkyard worker who handled the steering wheel was later found locked inside a shipping container, hands frozen around an invisible circle. Another man who salvaged a seat was plagued by condensation blooming on his bedroom window each night. Always in the shape of handprints pressed from the other side, the bus refused to vanish, and so sightings continued. Families reported glimpsing its yellow body at twilight, gliding smooth along the shoulder before fading into mist. One woman claimed it followed her car for miles, headlights looming in the rear view, though no sound of engine reached her ears. When she pulled into a gas station, the road behind her was empty. Yet her rear windshield bore streaks, as though fingers had dragged across the glass while she drove. Others began to treat the bus as an omen. To see it was to be marked. Within weeks, one might lose a loved one to sudden illness, accident, or vanishing. The survivors swore their dreams filled with fogged glass, their hands tracing invisible seats, their breath rising in clouds they could not clear, and still, children whispered to one another at night, daring each other to stand at the curve after dark. They said if you waved, the bus would slow, its doors opening with a sigh. That inside, the seats would be warm, the air thick with the faint scent of chalk and crayons. That if you stepped aboard, no one would stop you, but you would never return. Those who wave do not always vanish. Some continue their lives, outwardly unchanged. Yet their families notice subtle things, a child's voice singing from empty rooms, the sound of brakes hissing in the house at night, windows fogging from the inside though no one is near. It is as though a passenger boards them, carried into their dreams, riding silently within until the day it chooses to claim its fare. The driver who sat catatonic all those years ago still lives, though his body withers. He never regained his voice. His eyes, clouded now with age, still drift to corners where nothing moves. But every so often nurses swear he raises his hands, curling them into the shape of a wheel. And if you lean close enough, his lips tremble with one word, repeated like prayer. Stop, but the bus never does. It lingers, patient, at the bend where fog clings deepest, headlights steady, windows breathing with unseen lungs. And for those who wave, Whether in jest or in kindness, the ride begins long before they board. The bus still drifts through fog, waiting for passengers who will never step back into daylight. Its wheels hum on the curve, its windows breathe with those unseen, always seeking. And just beyond the bend, another silence waits. A roadside lined with too many white crosses, carved not only for the dead, but for those yet to come. Now start with third story. The road was never empty, though it tried to look that way. Its cracked asphalt hummed beneath truck tires, its fog rose with the rhythm of breath, and its silence pressed like a hand against the chest. But those who slowed at the curve noticed something stranger than the bend itself: the white crosses. They stood like sentinels along the shoulder, their rows uneven but unbroken, stretching from ditch to tree line. Some leaned with age, their paint flaked by rain, their nails rusted where photographs clung. Faces stared out from behind weather-streaked plastic, families once whole, eyes faded to shadows. The wind worried the edges of wilted flowers, tattered ribbons. Stuffed animals soaked through with mold. There were too many for one tragedy. No accident. No fire, no collision could account for so many graves along such a short stretch of highway. Yet no one dared question it aloud. For every local knew someone whose name had been carved into those crosses, and every traveler had heard the same whisper. They're still adding more. The strange part was not how many there were, but how some never aged. Amid the worn and peeling markers, there would always be a few pristine. Crosses white as fresh snow, wood splinter-free, names etched with crisp black paint. Their flowers stood upright, their photos untouched by mold, as though placed only hours before, and yet no one ever saw them erected. Truckers spoke of long-haul nights, pulling into the curve and resting their eyes for an hour. When they awoke, another cross stood outside, planted firm in the soil, its name unknown but the date clear, sometimes tomorrow, sometimes next week. More chilling still, one driver swore he saw his own surname nailed to the wood, the date marked only 2 days ahead. He never drove that road again, but months later, when his body was found in a wreck along another stretch of highway, the date matched exactly. Folklorists began cataloging the crosses, photographing each and mapping their growth. They discovered an unsettling pattern. The names carved into them always belonged to families, never lone travelers. The road seemed to hunger not for individuals, but for groups bound together, bloodlines, kin, whole households swallowed into silence. One researcher recalled finding a new cross at dawn, its date still in the future. The name etched upon it matched a family living 2 towns away. He drove straight to their house, heart hammering, but found them alive and well, laughing over breakfast. He tried to warn them, begged them not to travel the curve. They dismissed him politely, uneasy with his shaking voice. Days later, their minivan skidded through fog and never emerged. The cross had been waiting for them all along. Locals stopped leaving offerings at the markers. At first, it had been custom: flowers, toys, candles flickering in glass jars. But too often those gifts returned in odd ways. A bouquet left at one cross would appear weeks later at another. A candle burned clean in a storm with no glass to shield it. One family left their daughter's doll, only to find it on their own porch the next morning, damp with dew. Now the crosses were left alone, tended by no living hands. Yet the grass around them never grew too high, the soil never washed them away. They remained clean, orderly, as though the road itself preserved them. There were stories of travelers pulling over to examine the memorials more closely. Some swore that as they leaned down, the air grew thick with whispering, like prayers spoken through clenched teeth. The words were never clear, but the voices carried sorrow, urgency, a warning impossible to decipher. One woman claimed the photo nailed to a cross shifted as she stared, the eyes within following her as she backed away. Truckers refused to stop there anymore. They drove faster through the bend, knuckles white on the wheel, eyes fixed on the asphalt ahead. A few confessed to seeing crosses flash in their headlights, more than should have been there, entire rows crowding the shoulder. But when they returned in daylight, only a handful remained. The strangest account came from a deputy assigned to catalog the memorials. She walked the roadside with her clipboard, recording names and dates, her boots crunching gravel. When she reached one cross, she froze. It bore her own name. The date etched into its wood was that very day. She laughed uneasily, dismissed it as a cruel prank. But when she returned to her patrol car, the engine refused to start. She radioed for help, but static swallowed her words. Hours later, she was found slumped over the wheel. No wounds, no cause of death. Her eyes wide open as though she'd seen something coming from the fog. The cross still stands. Some speculate that the memorials are not human-made at all, that they rise from the soil, carved not by hand but by something deeper, the road itself marking those it intends to take. Others claim they are warnings, attempts by the dead to signal the living before it is too late. But if they are warnings, they are never heeded in time. One legend tells of a man who tried to defy the prophecy. He found his family's name on a cross dated 1 week ahead. Terrified, he packed his wife and children, driving hundreds of miles away, vowing never to return. But accidents followed them, near misses, brake failures, a fire in their rental cabin. On the 7th day, they were struck by a truck on an entirely different road. The curve had marked them, and distance could not undo it. The crosses remain patient. Each season, new ones gleam bright against the fading line of old. Always in clusters, always etched with names that belong to those who are not yet dead. Some travelers photograph them out of curiosity, but when they examine the photos later, the images are blurred. In certain frames, extra crosses appear that were never there. Pale shapes crowding the shoulder. On nights when fog thickens, the curve becomes a corridor of pale wood and shadow. Hundreds of crosses glowing faint in moonlight. It is said that if you stop your car and roll down your window, you will hear not only whispering, but the faint creak of wood as the crosses shift. And if you listen closely, you may hear nails tapping, as though invisible hands are hammering fresh ones into place. The road writes its own memorials. It waits, patient, carving names into wood before their time has come. And the living, terrified yet drawn, cannot resist looking for their own reflection there. If you ever drive that bend and see the crosses shining in your headlights, resist the urge to stop. Do not read the names, do not search for dates. For once you know, the road knows you too. The crosses stretch like pale teeth along the curve, each name etched by hands unseen, each date whispering of what has yet to come. The road keeps its tally, always hungry, always marking the next. And just beyond the last white cross, truckers whisper of a woman who waits at the shoulder, silent thumb raised, children's shadows pressing close behind her. Now start with 4th story. The curve was already infamous for its crosses, but the living knew another shadow haunted it, a figure less still than wood, more persistent than rumor. Truckers called her the Midnight Hitchhiker. She was always seen the same way. A pale woman standing at the roadside shoulder where the fog gathered thickest, her dress clinging white against her frame, her face veiled in shadow. Her posture was rigid, thumb raised, but she never waved. She simply waited, unmoving, her gaze fixed not on the road, but on the driver. No one knew when she first appeared. Some said she was a mother lost with her children in a crash, wandering the shoulder in search of them. Others claimed she was no victim at all, but a lure, a phantom that pulled drivers off their course. Regardless, her presence spread like wildfire among truck stops, whispered in coffee steam and CB chatter. If you see the woman in white, don't stop. Don't even slow down, but some did stop, and they all told the same story. The door would creak open, the hitchhiker stepping inside without a sound. She never asked for a ride, never asked for anything at all. She would simply sit, hands folded, her pale dress rustling faintly as though stirred by a wind no one else could feel. And then the cab would change. The seatbelts tugged tighter, as if pulled across shoulders that weren't there. The cushions dipped, groaned, compressed by invisible weight. Drivers swore they felt the heat of bodies behind them, rows of passengers where no one should be. And then came the cold, a creeping, breathless chill, as though the cab's heater had failed, no matter how high it was turned. Breath plumed in the dim dashboard light, and with it came the faintest echo of whispers, soft, childish voices, murmuring from behind. Most drivers could not bear to look into the rearview mirror. Those who did regretted it. They saw only fog at first, thick and clinging to the glass, then shapes within it. Faces pressed too close, mouths opening in silence, small hands brushing against the windows. Always children. The woman herself never spoke. Not until the ride was nearly done. When they reached the edge of the next town, she would turn toward the driver, her face still hidden in shadow, and raise her hand. Not to wave, not to thank, but to point, always pointing back toward the curve, urging the driver to return. The moment they blinked, she was gone. But the signs of her presence remained. Handprints in fog against the glass, sometimes dozens, smeared along every window. Some drivers swore they still felt pressure against their shoulders, as though the unseen passengers hadn't all departed. One trucker described glancing back to see his own jacket sleeve tugged by invisible fingers. He slammed the brakes, leapt from the cab, and never drove at night again. Stories spread further when townsfolk began finding abandoned rigs parked at the roadside. Engines still running, headlights burning through fog, but no drivers inside. The doors hung open, CB radios crackling into static. And always, faint, smeared handprints on the inside of the glass. The midnight hitchhiker didn't always choose truckers. A family once claimed to pick her up while driving home late from a wedding. They let her in reluctantly, unnerved by her silence. But what unsettled them most was the smell of damp earth that filled the car after she sat down. The children in the back grew restless, whispering about other kids crowding beside them, kids no one else could see. When they reached town, the woman vanished, but the youngest daughter was missing. Doors locked, windows sealed, yet the child was gone, her seatbelt still buckled. Only her breath fogged faintly on the glass. Search parties combed the curve for weeks. They found no trace of the girl, but one night, a new cross appeared among the others, carved fresh and white. The woman in white had claimed another. Some believe she is bound to the curve, unable to stray far from where her children were lost. Others argue she is the curve, the spirit of the road itself, appearing as the hitchhiker to lure the living into its hunger. What chills most is the detail every driver recalls. When she points back, her finger is never toward the open road, but toward the exact cluster of white crosses that mark the bend. One story tells of a driver who defied her. He picked her up, felt the chill of unseen passengers filling his cab, but when she raised her hand at the town's edge, he ignored her direction. He kept driving forward, speeding through the night, refusing to look in his mirrors. But the pointing hand remained. She never vanished. Mile after mile, town after town, she sat silently in the seat beside him, finger raised, eyes hidden. Hours turned to days, and still she remained, her pale form fixed, her finger unyielding. When they found his rig days later, the driver was still inside, eyes wide open, face frozen in terror. His body was slumped over the wheel, lips cracked, as though he had driven without rest until his heart gave out. The passenger seat was empty, but smeared handprints covered every window. Every surface, even the inside of his windshield, layered upon one another like frost. The hitchhiker had vanished, or perhaps finally been satisfied. Others who claim to have picked her up tell of hearing a lullaby in the back seat. Soft at first, a melody sung by children in hushed tones. But as the drive went on, the voices grew louder, overlapping, off-key, until the sound became unbearable. More than one driver abandoned their vehicle mid-route, stumbling into town on foot with their ears bleeding. When police returned their trucks, the radios played static, but within it, faintly, the same lullaby could still be heard. Now, few dare stop for her. When headlights catch the pale shape at the roadside, most speed up, gripping the wheel tighter, muttering prayers under their breath. But every now and then, curiosity, or compassion, wins. Someone stops, someone opens the door, and another set of handprints fogs the glass. They say she waits still, a white shadow at the curved shoulder, pointing always back toward the row of crosses, the place where the road first swallowed her children. And beyond her, in the same stretch of fog, truckers whisper of an even older sound, a phantom convoy of engines that roar without drivers, headlights gleaming with no one inside. Now start with fifth story. The accident was not unusual. Highways are littered with them, cars twisted against guardrails, headlights shattered like broken eyes. But what the rescuers found that night at the curve was different. The sedan had rolled off the embankment and come to rest upside down. Its frame crumpled like paper, glass scattered across the grass in a glittering spray. Steam still hissed from the hood when the first responders arrived, headlights catching the bent metal at cruel angles. And yet, the car was empty. The doors were locked from within, the windows still intact on the passenger side, belts stretched tight across seats with no one beneath them. Not a single trace of the family who had been seen traveling in the car hours earlier. No blood, no footprints in the mud, no drag marks leading away, only a photograph. It lay face up in the ditch, slick with rain, the water sliding across its glossy surface without smearing the ink. It showed a family of 4, parents in their 30s, 2 children beaming beneath a golden sunset. The picture seemed recent, the colors bright, the edges sharp. Someone had slipped it from an album, perhaps, to keep close. The rescuers carried the photograph back with them, unsure whether to catalogue it as evidence or keep it aside for the coroner. But by the time it reached the station, it was gone. No one remembered setting it down. A week later, after a storm, a farmer found the same photograph face up in a ditch 3 miles downstream. The edges were worn then, the paper waterlogged, and yet the faces smiled unbroken, untouched. Each year after heavy rains, the photograph returned. Always face up, always in a ditch near the curve. And each time the faces inside had changed. At first, the differences were subtle. A line deepened on the father's brow, the children's hair a little longer, their bodies taller. The mother's smile, strained now, as though she had grown tired of holding it. By the 5th year, the children looked like teenagers, shoulders sharp, eyes darkened with shadows. By the 10th, the father's hair had gone gray, the mother's face pale and distant. Yet the sunset behind them never changed, glowing, eternal, frozen. The family was aging. Inside the photograph, locals whispered of the missing car, the vanished family. Some said they had never died at all, that the curve had swallowed them whole. Others said the photograph was their prison, an eternal frame where they continued to exist, growing older year by year in a world no one else could touch. No matter how often the picture was taken away, pinned to bulletin boards, sealed in plastic, even burned once by a sheriff desperate to end the whispers, it always returned. Rain carried it downstream, depositing it face up, unmarred, as if the ditch itself demanded it be seen. A trucker once claimed he pulled it from the water during a storm, folding it into his coat. That night, he awoke in his sleeper cab to find the family standing outside the window. Not spectral, not glowing, but solid, damp from the rain, their eyes fixed on him. The children pressed their hands against the glass, breath fogging it as they smiled. The mother pointed toward the curve. By morning, the photograph was gone from his coat pocket. Years passed, and the picture's legend deepened. A highway patrolman swore he saw the family himself one foggy dawn. Their sedan, polished and whole again, idled at the curve. The father leaned against the hood, waving him down. But when the patrolman pulled over, the car dissolved into mist, leaving only the photograph on the asphalt. It had changed again. The family was older still. The children now adults, faces lean, eyes hollow. The mother's hand gripped the father's wrist in the photo, her knuckles white. The sunset behind them burned redder than ever before. The photograph aged, but never past the moment of their disappearance. They grew older in that frozen sunset, but never old enough to escape it. One year, the photograph didn't appear in the ditch. For weeks, storms swept through the hills, water rushing through culverts, but no one found the picture. Rumors stirred. Had it finally dissolved, or had the family escaped? Then, on a night of heavy rain, a young couple traveling the curve was found alive but shaken. Their car stalled in the same ditch where the photo always lay. They spoke of seeing another car ahead of them, an older sedan, tail lights glowing faintly through the storm. They followed it around the curve until it slid off the embankment, crashing silently into the ditch. When they ran down to help, there was no car, only the photograph waiting in the mud. The faces had changed again, the children, now grown, held children of their own, infants wrapped in white. The parents stood behind them, smiles stiff, eyes empty. Their family had expanded, trapped in the same eternal frame. That night, the young couple swore their own reflections in the rain-blurred glass looked different, older, as if the photograph had stolen years from them. Historians tried to trace the family in the picture, combing old records, missing persons lists, driver's registries. No family ever matched. It was as if the photograph had created them from the moment of the crash, capturing lives that had no past, only a future, played out in slow increments of rain and time. Some now say the photo doesn't just capture them. It chooses its next subjects. Each time a new storm sweeps through, travelers stop at the ditch, searching with dread to see if their own faces have appeared behind the glassy smiles. One man swears he found it and saw himself standing behind the family, a stranger in his own reflection. He tried to destroy it, tearing the paper into pieces. But when the rain came the next night, the photograph returned, whole again, and his face was closer. Others whisper that the family grows restless as the years pass, that their smiles have faltered, their bodies hunched, their eyes pleading through the gloss. They do not want to be there anymore. They want to trade places. Now, whenever storms strike the curve, locals warn travelers not to stop, no matter what they see in the ditch. If you pull over, you may find a photograph waiting, face up in the mud. And if you look closely, you may see more than strangers staring back. You may see yourself, smiling faintly, already framed in sunset. They say the photograph waits still, drifting downstream with every storm. Its face is changing as the years bend on. And if you find it, do not hold it long, or the road may frame you as its next memory. For beyond the ditch lies a deeper silence, the fog-choked graveyard of machines where vanished cars still idle. Headlights glowing, though no one sits behind the wheel. Now start with sixth story. It began with laughter on the road. 3 cars, each packed with relatives, sped through the valley toward the wedding. They kept close, headlights stitched in a glowing chain, voices drifting between rolled-down windows when the air was still. The bride's cousins in the lead car, her aunt and uncle behind, her parents in the third. They promised each other they would not lose sight, not on those winding mountain bends where fog rose thick as breath. The convoy moved together like a body with 3 hearts. Locals still remember the night, not because of what was seen, but because of what was not. Somewhere near the curve, the same curve whispered of in diner booths and truck stop counters, the lead car was there one moment, headlights bright, laughter spilling from its cracked windows. The next it was gone, not swerved, not slowed, simply gone, like a lamp blown out. The second car followed, swallowed in the same instant. Its beams winked out, leaving only 2 lights ahead for the third to chase. Then those too were gone, as if plucked from the night. The road lay empty. When the bride's family reached the venue without them, confusion turned quickly to dread. Guests scanned the lot, expecting the headlights to roll in late. But hours passed. A search began. Police scoured the highway, combing the ditch, walking shoulder to shoulder through the fog. Dogs were brought in, their muzzles pressed to the asphalt. Not a trace was found, no skid marks, no broken glass, no scattered debris. The road was smooth, as if no tire had ever touched it. 3 cars, 3 families, vanished as if the highway had swallowed them whole. And then the photographs surfaced. At the wedding, the photographer snapped hundreds of shots. The ceremony, the banquet, the dancing. When the film developed, something unsettled everyone who looked. The missing family members were there, not in every picture, but in several, seated among guests, hands folded neatly in their laps, eyes vacant as though they had wandered in by mistake. The bride's cousins appeared at a table with strangers, their faces pale, their smiles forced, eyes glinting faintly like reflections in water. The aunt and uncle stood in the back of a group portrait, blurred but unmistakable. The bride's parents sat in the second row of the ceremony, stiff as mannequins, their features sharpened as though carved into the photograph. And yet no one remembered them arriving. No one recalled seeing them in person. The seats they supposedly filled had been empty all night. Worse still, Some swore the strangers in the photographs, people no one could name, began to look familiar, as though they had taken the places of the vanished. When guests searched the photographs again weeks later, the faces of the unknown seemed sharper, closer, edging toward recognition. One bridesmaid admitted she found herself in a picture she didn't remember posing for, seated beside the missing cousins, smiling with her head tilted just so. She swore she had not been there when the photo was taken. She tore the picture apart, but the next day it appeared whole again on her nightstand, the smiles darker, the eyes more hollow. The legend grew, and with it, theories. Some said the convoy had slipped into another world, a ghostly echo where weddings still played out in endless loops, the missing trapped forever as uninvited guests. Others whispered that the photographs were not records of reality, but invitations, each face inside already claimed by the road. For months, families avoided the curve after dusk. Yet still, some claimed to see headlights chaining through the fog, 3 beams in a line, gliding too smoothly, too silently, never catching up, never slowing down. Travelers would honk or flash their brights, only to find the road empty a second later. A trucker swore he passed the convoy himself. 3 cars, old models, polished and gleaming as if from another decade, windows rolled up tight. He glanced at the drivers, expecting tired men, restless kids. Instead, he saw faces stiff and pale, eyes forward, lips pressed in rigid half-smiles. They did not blink, did not move, not even when he pulled alongside them. By the time he looked back, the lane was empty. The wedding photographs did not stop appearing. Every anniversary, another photo surfaced, tucked into albums, slipped under doors, found face up on kitchen counters. Guests who had once attended would find their own likeness frozen beside the missing, their features warped by the same faint blur. As if the road was still choosing, still weaving new names into its eternal guest list. One photograph, discovered 10 years after the wedding, showed a new couple at the altar. No one knew them, no one recognized the chapel, but in the background, row upon row of seats were filled. The 3 missing cars' worth of relatives sat among the strangers, smiling faintly, hands folded, as though they had been waiting all along. Some now say the convoy was not taken but transformed, its passengers conscripted into the road's endless ritual, appearing only in photographs, haunting the lives of those who dare to look too closely. The curve, it seems, does not always demand wreckage. Sometimes it demands memory, trapping its victims not in steel and glass, but in paper and ink. And so the warning grew. If you ever see 3 cars strung together in fog, headlights gliding like pearls through the night, do not follow. Do not honk, do not wave. For if you do, you may find yourself in a picture you don't remember taking, seated beside strangers whose faces are already fading. The convoy never arrived at the wedding, but it still arrives in photographs. And sometimes, if you stand long enough at the curve, you might hear the faint sound of laughter carried on the wind. 3 voices calling from cars that are no longer there. They say the convoy rides still, headlights gliding through the fog. Cars filled with passengers who never reach their destination, their smiles trapped in photographs that should not exist. And somewhere ahead, on the same endless road, searchers whisper of another disappearance, where a bus full of children turned the bend and never returned. Now start with 7th story. The sedan should have been empty. It was discovered at dawn by a highway worker, parked just past the curve, headlights fixed on the tree line as though searching for something in the fog. The engine hummed faintly, steady but hollow, as if each cylinder was filled not with fuel but with breath. The doors were open. The seats were sunken, cushions depressed as though bodies had just risen and stepped into the night. Yet no footprints marked the mud, no tire tracks led beyond the asphalt, no belongings lay scattered in panic. The car was there, its passengers were not. In the glove box, the worker found a map. The paper was damp, edges curled from repeated folding, routes traced and retraced in smudged pencil. And at the bend itself, drawn in ink so shaky the pen must have trembled in the hand, was a circle. Around it, scrawled 3 times in uneven script, was a single word: home. The car was towed to the impound lot, later sold to a scrapyard where rust now eats its frame. But those who approach it swear the engine still ticks when night settles, even though the battery has long since died. And if the radio knob is turned, static fills the air, static that hides voices, layered whispers speaking in tones too broken to name. They say the voices call not in anger, not in fear, but in recognition. As though they know you. When investigators first examined the sedan, they noticed more than the sag of the cushions. The steering wheel bore faint indentations, as if gripped tightly by hands that no longer pressed against it. The rearview mirror had been tilted away, pushed upward, as if the driver could not bear to look into it. The strangest detail was the smell. The car carried no trace of fuel, no lingering cologne or fast food wrappers, only the unmistakable scent of soil, damp and loamy, as though the entire cabin had been buried underground and then dug back up. One officer swore he saw flecks of moss along the floor mats, green strands curling from fibers that had no reason to grow there. But it was the radio that unsettled him most. When he turned the dial, it hissed, catching fragments of stations that didn't exist, lullabies sung too slowly, newscasters repeating words in backward cadence, children's laughter threaded faintly under static. And between the bursts, one phrase surfaced again and again: "Come home." The officer refused to sit in the car a second time. Stories followed the sedan into the scrapyard. Mechanics swore that no matter how many times they stripped the engine, draining it bare, the block rattled, as if something hollow breathed inside. At night, workers heard faint thuds from the trunk, like fists pressing outward, though when opened, it was empty. Once during a storm, a worker claimed to see the seats rise as if occupied, the belts tugging tight across invisible shoulders. He ran, refusing to return. The next morning, a second map was found in the glove box. Not the original, but another, folded clean, ink fresh. The same curve circled. The same word written thrice: home. No one admitted to leaving it there. The maps multiplied. Each time the glove box was checked, another appeared, edges crisp as though newly drawn. Each bore different handwriting. Some hurried, some neat, some childish, but always circling the same bend, always whispering the same destination: home. The scrapyard owner finally chained the car shut, but the chains rusted through within days. Now the vehicle sits alone, weeds rising through its wheels, windshield cracked but still reflecting light even when no sun reaches it. And some nights, if you walk too close, the headlights flare once more, glowing faintly, cutting the fog like two eyes reopening. Those who linger near the sedan claim to hear footsteps circling the gravel, though no one else is there. A few swear the voices inside the radio call their own names, spoken in the tones of people long dead. One trucker confessed to climbing into the car, half drunken, daring himself to drive it. He turned the key, expecting silence, but the engine caught instantly, purring low and hollow. The radio clicked on, and in its static he heard the voice of his wife, a woman who had passed years before. She said nothing of comfort, nothing of reunion. She simply said, "We are waiting. Come home." He drove the car out of the yard that night, headlights fixed forward, wheels humming against the cracked asphalt. No one saw him again. At dawn, the sedan was back in its spot, idling faintly, seats sagged. Another map waiting inside the glove box. The scrapyard workers stopped touching it after that. Legends spread among locals that the sedan was not abandoned, but returned. That whoever sat behind its wheel was never truly gone, only folded into the road, their weight still pressing the cushions, their hands still gripping the wheel, their breath fueling the hollow engine. The maps, they said, were not left behind by ghosts, but by those still trapped inside, trying again and again to find their way home. And what unsettled most was the handwriting. One night, a mechanic opened the glove box and found a map with his own hand traced across it, the circle drawn with the exact tremor of his pen. His name had been written in the corner. He quit the next day. Now the car sits silent, or appears to. Children dare each other to sneak close, to press their ears against the cracked glass. They claim the whispers grow louder with every heartbeat until words form clear. It's not yours. It's ours. And we're still inside. No one dares start it anymore. But even chained and rusting, the hollow purr sometimes drifts across the scrapyard at night, carried through the fog like breath in the dark, and always. Inside the glove box, another map waits, circled in trembling ink, the word written 3 times like a vow: home, home, home. They say the sedan still waits in rust, its engine breathing hollow in the night, maps multiplying as though the road is charting itself, circling the same place again and again. And beyond the scrapyard, whispers rise of a darker fate, an entire town erased by the curve, its lights extinguished in a single night, leaving only silence where homes once stood.